Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is John Gibbons. I'm from Texas A&M Commerce. The title of my presentation is Using Perusall to Support Collaborative Learning in a Teacher Training Course. So a little bit of a agenda for today. I'll start out with some background of where this particular part of the study took place. I'll talk about the class context, some of the background of my students and the environment that it was done in. And then I'll introduce what actually social annotations are. That's the tool that I use in my study. What is Perusall? Perusall is just a particular company that does social annotations, kind of like Google, it's a search engine. And then I'll go over Perusall, what the layout is, some of the tools it has for teachers, what it looks like on the student side, some of the analytics it has, some of the tracking it has. We'll look at actually some interactions of the students as they're performing their annotations. And then we'll look at some of the student responses in a survey and interview I did. I chose some parts of it that I could present in this presentation of some of the longer interviews I had. And then at the end, we'll close up with some pedagogical considerations and some concluding remarks. So this current study is part of a larger research project, my dissertation. And this part addresses the following research question is, how do the students use Perusall to co-construct knowledge and learn collaboratively through the social annotating task? And to look into that, I did a survey for examine student perceptions and some interview data that was explored. So the context for this class is, it's an undergraduate upper level teaching ESL course. It's an entirely online course. It has mostly juniors and senior students, and the majority of them are pre-service teachers. There's some psychology and some outside, but most of them, I would say 80%, 90% are pre-service teachers. The task for the students for this particular assignment was they had to collaboratively reading of a text. In this case, one of them was a book chapter, another was a journal article. There were two separate review papers they had to do on it. And they occurred about the middle of the semester, and the second one occurred towards the end of the semester. And so prior to their individual writing, the students collectively read the book chapter, which was Integrating Pronunciation into Listening and Speaking Classes. And for the second one, they read the journal article, Patterns of Corrective Feedback and Uptake in an adult ESL Classroom. And the students used the social annotations to highlight and comment with each other. And they were allowed to use those annotations that they collaboratively made together while working on the reading, and use it in their individual review papers. And individual review papers were rather short. They're about 500 or 600 words, which consists of just a summary and then a reflection aspect of it. So what are social annotations? Social annotations, if you think back to if any of you use the traditional paper books or printed out journal articles, you would sometimes make up markings in the margins or underline text or highlight things like that. Social annotations are a similar sort of thing where the teacher uploads a document, PDF, book chapter, it can be video even, it can be pretty much any sort of media you want. And then students are able to highlight, write notes in the margin that other students can see, comment with other students, interact with other students, indicate to other classmates, okay, this is where I'm really interested in this is where I'm confused. They can share comments and observations and have discussions. And one of the nice things about Perusall is it's in direct interaction with the text. So as opposed to say something like a discussion board that you see a lot in our online classes where you have a reading that's over here on another page or another part of the, another window, or perhaps they don't even have it open, and they have a discussion post where they discuss this document that's over here or something that we've talked about. With social annotations, you're working directly on the text. So everything that you're talking about, you're actually highlighting and looking at it as you're making comments and interacting with your classmates. So why use Perusall? One of the problems instructors have, and one of the problems I found when I went to teaching entirely online a few years back, is routinely there's frustration, and this isn't just an online class that the frustration occurs, is students choose not to complete the required reading assignments. So readings are essential for all courses, especially online courses where Perhaps you might not have as much face-to-face time with students one-to-one. And so because of this lack of student engagement with course text had me looking for things. Okay, how can I get students to engage more with text? How can I know that they're doing the reading before we have discussions in class or discussions online on discussion board, as opposed to maybe the students just jumping on discussion boards and sort of reading what other comments were and then feeding off that without actually doing the reading. How can I keep up the reading rate? And reading on some of the background on Perusall is, this is a collaborative e-reading. It allowed the students to upload text, or the teacher to upload text, and use the tool to enhance interaction, better understand and comprehend text, share notes, increase reading times. And a lot of the research has been done in L2 up to now. So a lot of it allowed for L2 readers to increase their reading time, inquire on what other readers were looking into, and it was seen to increase reading motivation as well. So what does Perusall actually look like? This is the teacher side of it. This is the first thing you see as a teacher. It's really very simple. If you've taught an online class, it'll probably take you about 5 minutes to get up to speed on how to use it. It's very clear how you can add content. I added all the content from my computer. I would simply download the PDF. The chapter that they were interested or that I wanted them to read, upload it for them to look at, and it was very simple. Each assignment I just had an upload and had it ready for them. And this is again for the teacher side. We'll look some more into some of the ways you can look at what the students have done in a minute, but this is just the first splash page you have as a teacher. You can see below on the below right where you can see, okay, some students have submitted, some have not. You can see all new conversations that have started, things like that. So it's very simple for the teacher when they upload their document, and very simple for them to get started. Again, it took me about 5 minutes to get going. It's integrated right into D2L, so there's nothing outside I had to do. I didn't have to have a new account or anything like that. Students don't have to need to start a new account. It's very, very simple, and it's very, very effective to get started quickly. For the student, this is the first thing they see, which is great because it's very simple. There's not a lot of things for them to do. All they have to do is come in. They have a link for them straight through D2L, where D2L is our LMS, Learning Management System platform. We used it, Texas A&M Commerce, whichever one you guys use. If you're teaching Canva, anything like that, it integrates well into it. And so they can click right onto their assignments page or in their content, or you can even put a link in an announcement, and they go straight to this page. And they can go get right to work with just one click on the green box, and then get right to their assignment. So for their assignment, what did I do? What did I do for them? I had it broken down into 2 tasks. So the initial task was them to collaboratively read either a book chapter or a journal article. This was the first thing they had to do. And then they would annotate with the classmates as a group. I did this 2 weeks before it started. I had done exploratory studies, and I had done this in the past and manipulated some of the times that the students had to do everything up to from a half a semester to a week. And 2 weeks was what I found was the best way to have it concentrated enough where that they could have, there was enough people there at the same time. Conversations were not stretched out too long to where that people wouldn't know what we were talking about from one moment to the next. So 2 weeks was what I used. And then they would move on once they were done doing all their annotations with their classmates. They had an individual review paper that they did, and then they wrote that on their own. So for the student requirements and their Perusall tasks, I had them give at least one question. So everybody had to have one question that they presented, and then a minimum total was 7 annotations. That could be more questions, it could be comments. I even had students post links to outside resources that were very helpful. And then I wanted them to try content of the reading back to information we had covered in class. So the idea of the review paper was to have them tie the reading to what we covered in class. And I did that, and I let the students know that prior to their annotating, so they had an idea of what the overall goal was for them to do. It was to annotate, but an annotate to tie back to information we covered into our class, which was an ESL teaching class. They were explicitly told that they can use ideas from their classmates. So there was no, some of the students in previous semesters had expressed concern that they're reluctant to use ideas from classmates because of plagiarism issues. The idea for this, I told them, was this is a class, sort of think about it as a class conversation where they're sitting around talking about the paper together. They can use anything from their classmates that they talked about. It's all fair game for them to have because it's something that they've collectively created with each other. So what does the Perusall look like for them actually when they jump in? So this is what Perusall looks like from the user point of view. You can go in, you highlight the text, and on the right side, you can post comments. Very similar to a thread that you would see in, again, Canva or D2L or a learning management system that you have online. And so you highlight text, and then the student can make their comment, and then you have student engagement that follows up behind that. So a number of students can either agree, disagree, answer the questions that were posed, things like that. Again, just a few more examples to get you an idea of what we're talking about here. So here you have a student who highlighted pronunciation defines the way a person speaks. And then CJ comes in and comments, pronunciation is a huge factor in language learning. And so they start to talk going forward, and you have follow-up conversations. I think the student learning English is also a real impact on how they learn to speak. XF agrees, I agree. So you have this sort of conversation to get started, and then they build off of this to develop a little bit of community in class. Again here, this is a good example of really what I was looking for when I first started to use Perusall. This is the sort of interaction that I really would like to see out of my students, and I saw quite frequently is. So you have a student come in, they have a question about what final intonation is, they highlight it, and then you have a number of students, this particular thread, where you had students going back and forth answering, talking about what fixed rule of intonation following rising intonation is, are there any guidelines, fixed rules like that. This thread ended up being about 13 or 14, 15 students that all chimed in to talk about this one topic and develop, pool their resources, pool their knowledge, so they could better understand what this particular point of confusion was for this one student. A couple more slides, and then we'll move on to some more aspects of it. Again, here, this is one thing that I hadn't talked about in class, the super segmentals. This was something that was only in this paper. It wasn't something in this particular class that we talked about before. So this was new information that they hadn't come across, and they were able to collaborate and answer some of the questions that they had that was perhaps something they didn't know about. And this particular comment was viewed by a lot of students because it was answered rather quickly and concisely. But again, students working together to answer some of the questions that they had in this paper, because honestly, as a teacher, sometimes you simply just can't answer or maybe anticipate what all the questions or the unknowns that students might have on any particular paper. So again, another highlight, and this is a student posted a YouTube video here. We're talking about pitch here and how to use things like hand movements and stuff like that, how to describe pitch for students. And this student, EJ, posted a video that was very, very helpful for all the other students. As a teacher, you kind of got to make sure that you check and double check the videos to make sure they're okay. But I was explicit about the students. They can use any resources they want. They can post anything they want as long as it's about the content and it's their space. I never came in, I never made comments, and I never addressed anything unless there was an issue or something that was incorrect, and I never came across anything that was. And then one more here with students. One thing I did see was a lot of students bringing in their own personal experiences into it. So here you have a student talking about, I had a lot of bilingual students in this class. And so we have this teacher, when I speak, or teacher trainee, when I speak Spanish, my pitch goes higher than when I speak English. Do you all hear this? This is a good instance of how we had a lot of community building. We had students who maybe were completely bilingual or had just some ability in another language, and they could bring in some of their own personal experiences. And it was a good way to build for the students to develop camaraderie in class, because you saw a lot of these conversations that may have started within the first paper and the first assignment carry over into the second assignment, where you had students that had made connections. You know, here's this one student here, my family from Mexico has mentioned that my tone is way different when I speak in English. So here you have students giving personal anecdotes. That is a great way to build community, especially in an online class where there's such maybe a disconnect sometimes between the student behind a computer and the other students. And this is a great way where you have this sort of bonding that you have with students in the class through Perusall, which is very helpful. And then here, total physical response. This is a particular specific aspect of our course. We talk total physical response as one chapter in our book. And so this is one of the things I really was hoping to look at is, okay, we have this paper that we're reading. Can we tie everything back to what we've done in the course? So encourage your students, if you're going to use something like this, to make sure don't just read the text in isolation. Have it something where you're making connections with not only the text they're reading, but also with the course they're taking and some personal connections, and have everything sort of have a synergy here for the students in the learning process. And here, as I mentioned, these are all pre-service teachers. And so here's a nice example of pre-service teachers having a conversation with another future teacher about this is good to know. It's talking about different ways to teach students, final intonation, suprasegmentals, things like that. MC here says this is good to know that it's the best to teach students separately because it seems like it confused them. I agree, it's confusing for us. Now imagine for our future students. So you already have this conversation of the students right now in this course, being forward-looking, using this content, pitching ideas off of each other as future teachers, and hopefully taking this, maybe the connections they've made in this class, going forward into maybe personal connection they have as they move into the teaching workforce. So with Perusall, there's a lot of things you can do as a teacher. How do you want to score, and how do you want to track? There are ways that it has automated scoring, automated tracking. I didn't use it because I wasn't quite sure how the automated tracking worked. So I couldn't give my students clear expectations on what they needed to do. And also doing some background reading and being a student myself, students tend to find the ways that they can game automatic scoring system. So I wanted to avoid that. You can set whatever number of annotations you want. That's what I chose. I chose a minimum of 7. You can give them active reading targets. That's, how long are they actively reading, as opposed to say hovering over one page. Again, I didn't use this because I wasn't quite sure how the active reading grading worked. You can do engagement dependent markers. Just how much do they engage with other students? What do students get as a response rate? And what kind of upvotes, downvotes students use? I didn't use this as well because I wasn't sure if students would begin to understand that, okay, we have response rates and upvotes that we can get maybe better grades with. And then you could have students that knew each other that might be working together to help maybe boost their score. So I didn't use any of those kind of things for scoring. I graded the annotations all separately, looked at them all. This wasn't a huge class. It was only 20 students. But I can't imagine if you had a class of, say, 100, a large lecture class, that you might want to use something like automated scoring. So for this is a student or a teacher view on this side. This is just one of the analytical pages they have. This is one I used quite frequently because you can pop in really quickly as a student, and you can see I had one scoring mechanism I did turn on is the recommendation of 7 annotations. So it did track their annotations. So I could come in and look in at the students, and I could see, okay, in this case, at this point, a little over a third of the students have already got all their annotations in. About a quarter of them have started, but they're not completed. A little slice there has some work completed, but about a third of the class hadn't started yet. This was pretty typical. This was a shot I had checked rather early on in the assignment. And so as it went on, I was able to check on this rather quickly. This is a great way for you to peek in. This is one of the analytics that was available for me when I would check in. So if you see on the left or right, it's just a number of page views are your bars. And then the average view time you see is the line you see going from left to right with the peaks and valleys here. And so just an example is one page view had 122 page views on page 5, which is, this class was about 20 students. So you can imagine had a lot of students maybe going through a first pass read, then coming back to it several times. And so average view time was pretty short. So I'm not quite sure how to square that, but as you can see, there's peaks and valleys of average view time. You can make that as what you will for some of the ones towards the end. The one peak at the very end at about page 20, 21, I conjectured with that one that is a case where students had got to the end, simply left it open and walked away. So don't use the average view time as a end all be all for this. Use it as more of a guide, especially if you have peaks in the in the middle of the paper where sort of the bulk of sort of the more complex reading is, and not towards the end. So I could go back and look at, okay, we had a lot of view time here and a lot of page views relative on page 7, 8, 9, 10. We had a big peak there. So as a teacher, you can go back. You can not only look at what was in the text for this particular peak, you can also go back and get a good look as to, okay, what were they talking about here? So you can actually go back to page 9, 8, 9, 10 and look at what the students were talking about. Is it something they're interested in? Is it something they're very confused about? So in the next class period, you can go back and you can address any of the confusions they might have, or if it's something that they're really particularly interested in, you can structure some of your future lectures around a topic that apparently through the page views and the view time, that you have a class that's really interested in this, and that this might be something you might inquire with the students. So you can go back and get a better look at what they're talking about. So what should you expect for these annotations? There is a lot of community building and support. So a lot of students just building connections with other students, talking about relating to experiences. This is a ESL, EFL class with a lot of bilinguals. So there's a lot of opportunities for community building where students talked about their own experiences, maybe where they spoke Spanish at home and were learning a language in class. And so it really tied in well with this particular class. And also make sure that they have a shared goal. So in this case, their shared goal was, although they all had an individual review paper they had to do, they all had to do it. So they all knew that they were making annotations here together for their own review paper. So they all knew what they were there for, which was a good idea for the students. So they're not just there annotating with no particular direction or purpose. So it's just the follow-on point here. They really did appreciate knowing the goals. So they liked the fact that they knew, okay, I'm going in here with these annotations for the purpose of this review paper. And they knew what they had to do in the review paper. They knew they had to make ties to things we did in class. I had done it previously in my pilot study and using Perusall, just getting to know to use it in previous semesters, where I hadn't let them know that they were doing the annotations for the review paper. And the annotations turned out to be not really focused. There was a lot of jumping around from topic to topic that wasn't really, didn't manifest itself in positive interactions that was really building knowledge for the students. It was more almost chit chat you had between students, which is fine for community building, but maybe not so good if they have goals. And questions were by far the most productive, which it was expected on my part, because it begs for the interaction from other students. You can have either students had the same question themselves, or students with knowledge of the answer were eager to come in and post answers to help their classmates out. So it was a good way for me as well as instructor to see the weak points in where, okay, there's a lot of confusion here. Let me address this on Monday when I have a Zoom session. Because a lot of times, if you have a asynchronous class as a teacher, you don't have all your students in class. So you might not be getting the immediate feedback you need to know where there's weak points or where there's confusion in some things. So by looking at the annotations, you can get a good insight into where they might not be as comfortable expressing them in a chat in class. They know it's recorded and they know maybe other students are going to be watching. There's a lot of reasons why students don't want to participate in class. But this was a way where you could see them knowing that I wasn't taking part in Perusall. It was their thing. I went in afterwards, and then afterwards I could see what was going on. So after the course closed, I had the students do a survey, and several students did semi-structured interviews. So I wanted to find out, how was it helpful? How was it helpful in understanding? Did they feel the information exchanged? Did they internalize it? Did they use it in their individual writing? What do they feel about community? Did they feel it was positive, negative for community? What were their overall impressions of it? And so survey went out. This is just about 5 of the questions. The survey was a little bit larger, but these are representative of what I found. On the far right in blue is strongly agree, strongly disagree all the way on the left. So you notice I had one strongly disagree on all of these. So maybe there was a particular student that didn't enjoy it so much. But so first, when I integrated ideas from my classmates into my own thinking, almost all but one either strongly agreed or just agreed. Perusall encouraged co-construction of knowledge. Again, the same thing, either strongly agreed or agreed. My classmates' ideas informed my Ideas informed my review paper. A little bit more mixed here. Got a mix of neither agree or disagree, agree or strongly agree. Perusall helped create a learning community. So this one, everybody strongly agreed or agreed, again, with the one strongly disagreed. It was helpful having guidelines. Most all students agreed with this. So that's a good thing to keep in mind when you're making this for your students. I'd like to use Perusall in another class. A little bit more mixed on this one. So agree to not all the way to neutral for most of the students. 3 of them either disagreed or strongly disagreed. Some quotes for my students. These are a little representative. I agree, like all student usually does. She's talking about here discussion boards and how discussion boards tend to be just agreement. She said, in Perusall, they were allowed to ask questions, have questions answered. There's a good way to engage everyone. She liked the way you could interact and build off each other's ideas and use for research papers and like the reason stuff. And then here, I liked adding personal experience. So that's community building I was talking about. And it's a way that other people could understand where I'm coming from, how I can relate to that, and see how other people can relate as well. So again, this idea of you using it to build a community in an online class, which is sometimes difficult for students to do because there's not that much sort of real feeling of interaction with other students. Again, this student, no, actually loved it. I personally think it really helped the reading comprehension. She mentioned after graduated, she stopped doing annotations, which she had done previously. So it helped her get back into that. And so she liked doing annotations simultaneously while reading. And it felt like she didn't get too consumed in the amount that was required to read. So this was only about an 18, 20-page research paper. But as I mentioned earlier, students do have some difficulty sometimes with reading text, especially larger text. And she mentioned, and this is something I hadn't considered, is it made the reading go a lot smoother. So she said, so when we get these big amount, or she said, when we have these big pieces of the reading to do, you like get so caught up in the amount of trying to finish rather than just practicing or doing it for your understanding. So again, I hadn't considered this, but it's something she brought up, that using Perusall and having the interaction as you made your way through these texts, what made the text less imposing on them to read. It didn't feel like it was such a big task because it was something that maybe they felt that they were doing with their classmates, commenting with each other as they went along, which is a really interesting insight that I got from the student. And it's something that I wish I'd put in my survey to sort of inquire about that. A few more comments. So here we have one student. She's an instructor at the moment, taking a class, and she wants to be she's going to be a kindergarten teacher here soon. And so it feels sometimes we get overwhelmed, too consumed in trying to make one particular thing work for students, right? So having that input of other classmates, having a different mind, like a clean slate. So here she is bouncing ideas off her classmates for things to do in class. I love hearing what other people have to say because then I can apply it to what I'm doing. So teachers working with other teachers to have things in class, and then everybody's happy. And I thought that's what worked with this class specifically is we have so many present or hopeful future teachers. So again, this class makeup was particularly perfect for this kind of interaction with students because they had students that had hard goals outside and beyond this class. The class was topical for what they want to do, but you had a community, a ready-made community going into the class. So what are some pedagogical recommendations? Train the students, seed it with annotations. By that, I mean, I train my students with the syllabus. I uploaded the syllabus, and then I would ask 1 or 2 questions. Do you understand this part of the grading rubric, or do you understand the points, how the point system works? And then that way it gets students started. I had 0 issue with students understanding how to use it. Decide how many annotations the students need to enter, so let them know because they will ask how many annotations do I need. How will you grade? Be specific. I didn't use the automated grade or anything like that. I graded, basically have 7 annotations, 1 of questions. Are you going to annotate? Are you going to assess content or just a number? Will you use the automated grading? So I didn't. It's up to you if you want to. It has a bunch of different metrics again, but I felt that I didn't have enough control over that or wasn't quite sure how it worked. And I didn't want any aspect of my student grading up to something I wasn't 100% about and couldn't tell them 100% what it was for. Consider having the annotation assignments part of a larger goal. So the larger goal for them was their individual writing. So they knew that they were doing their annotations for this greater goal. You could have tests, you could have group assignments, anything like that. So have Perusall, if possible, part of this larger goal. What type of annotation? Again, we've touched on that. Make sure they know they can use upvotes and emojis. Talking to my students in the interview process, they didn't know that it was okay to use emojis in a academic setting, which I guess I can understand in retrospect. So I should have made it clear that it's okay. You can just use an emoji if it's something that you just want to, maybe give a little solidarity with other students when they're posting. Decide on the groupings. I recommend the whole class. Again, if you have 100 students in the class, maybe not. But there are papers out there where classes that large have worked with whole class groupings. If you have a group assignment that is for the students to do, then you could group students that way. So maybe if this was an L2 class and you had them all working in groups of 3 to 5 to read a paper and then write a group paper on it, then maybe you could put the groups that way. Or if you had maybe in groups learning, in a second language classroom, doing things like translation, like that. But assess not only the project, but also assess the collaboration that gives them motivation. And then the final slide for us is class makeup and topic matters, as one of my students mentioned, that this was all pre-service teachers, future teachers. So this was a ready-made class for them to build a community and build collaboration. It allows a voice for students who may be reluctant to speak up in class and may be reluctant to post on discussion boards, because you have a lot of students kind of posting together and they use their initials and there's a lot of other stuff like that. They can post back and forth, and it just felt like it was a little safer for students to post on here. And with them knowing that I wasn't going to be there, I told them I'm not going to come in and post. I'm not going to comment. I'm not reading y'all stuff. So it's y'all space to do anything. Doesn't have to be limited to just articles. I thought back to when I could have used it as a student. It could be used for anything if you were teaching phonological rules or teaching a second language like Mandarin or Spanish, or even classes like organic chemistry. There's always you could use it anywhere a collaboration could benefit. It's just up to you how you want to use it as a teacher. It's possibilities to use it in any class are there for you. There's my references, and that will close it up. Any comments you all have, please send them my way.
John, thank you for sharing. I have a question, just to check my understanding. You did not participate in the annotations, but you just were reviewing what the students annotated. Is that right?
Yes, and I told them before they started, it was their space. They know that they're reading this together. They all have an individual review paper they're going to have to do in 2 weeks. But y'all's conversation is y'all's conversation. It's like a group, sort of a round table that they have a discussion. If it was maybe a freshman level class, I might have considered, first, second year students, maybe making sure everything's going in the right direction. But given that it was mostly juniors and seniors, third, fourth, fifth year students, and mostly all students that were very motivated as pre-service teachers, I stayed out of this one and let it be their space.
Thank you.
Chat. Did I allow students to translate in their annotations? I allowed them to do anything they want. Again, kind of touching on the previous question I was asked, it was their space. So, they didn't use any of their first language in it. I think it was probably just because they knew that a number of the students might not have been able to understand, but there was no real limitations on what they could do in their annotations. It was all their space. So I wasn't explicit on whether or not they could use it, but again, they certainly would not have been counted off if they had. Good point, though. I'll be using it again this semester, and I'll be assigning it here in about 3 weeks. I'm going to make sure I do make a point of that, along with saying it's okay to use their emojis.
a follow-up question. In the guidelines or requirements for the students, did you require them to respond to any other student directly, or they just had to make their own annotations and questions and could respond, or were they required to make a response to somebody else's note?
There was no requirement to make a response. And the reason I sort of stuck with the 7 have 1 question comment is because I did several test runs with this. I had a pilot study, and I'd used this in previous semesters. And it was something that I hadn't considered because it wasn't something that I saw as a need, because most students, they were eager to respond to threads. So the first initial comment, there was a couple of them where it was typically students would come in at the end of the class and try and get their Perusall aspect put in. And so there was no responses to a few comments, but there was no actual requirement you had to respond to students. It was just, treat it like a discussion thread and try and build knowledge. And they really did run with it well. But it's a good idea, especially if I were to be using this in perhaps a class that wasn't so, students that weren't so eager to throw ideas off each other. It's something that I might decide to do.
So another question. I understand you uploaded the texts through PDFs.
Yes.
So did you copy those out of textbook, and there's not any copyright issue because the students have all
There is
purchased that
copyright.
textbook?
Yeah, there's 2 ways you can do that. There's you can purchase textbooks through Perusall. We don't require them to do that. So everything I uploaded into their Perusall was through our library. So we can use, for copyright reasons, I avoided anything that wasn't available in our library. So that way, you have to be careful about that, as you probably pointing this out, is so you can either use everything that you have available through your school library, or you can use Perusall textbooks. It's probably a lot of the same textbooks you already use. I didn't do that simply because I didn't want to put another extra purchase on the students we have in this class. One of the things I liked about Perusall is that they didn't have to purchase anything. I didn't want them to have to purchase another textbook. And also with Perusall, they didn't have to sign up for anything, which is great. So that is one thing to keep in mind as when you're a teacher, as you're uploading stuff, is be careful of copyright stuff. It's something or open educational resource. Yeah. So yeah, as well as Nikki mentioned, open educational resources as well. So yeah, do be aware of that with copyright, because it can come back and get you if you're not careful.
Hi, thank you for this presentation. My university has a license for Hypothesis, which is similar to Perusall, as I understand, and it integrates into our Canvas learning management system. So I am just starting to experiment with it now. And in terms of like the kinds of materials that students can annotate, because I'm also a teacher educator, so I've been really, we've had this license for some time, and I've been like, well, how would I use it? When would I want to use it? What's really an assignment that's going to be meaningful for my students. My course is a 100% online asynchronous course, with students who are around the world. So, what was going to be a meaningful assignment for them. So I haven't had them just annotate an article yet, but I'm planning to use it for in a methods course, like to have them annotate lesson plans, to put up a lesson plan and let them critique a lesson plan. Or also I teach a course on materials development. So, looking at different materials, but in terms of like what's available, so since so many publishers do have their textbooks online, or they have sample units from their textbooks online, so I think, it would be, there's not an issue then of, using those materials to annotate. And also, as I understand, I haven't tried it yet, but in Hypothesis, you can also link to like websites where they
Yeah.
can annotate websites. And I think, another potential is if you had students watch a YouTube video or some video where there was a transcript, that they could annotate the transcript of the video, to make comments on different parts of the video. So yeah, I'm just starting to be thinking around how to best use it in my classes. I don't think I want to use it every time or every week, but I wondered for you, since you said this was like part of research that you were doing, how did they just do the one assignment, or how often did you use these types of assignments in your course?
Okay.
Thanks.
I'll also touch on Hypothesis. I actually was going to use Hypothesis at first, and then I found out that Perusall was something that our school had already bought. They're very, very similar. I'm not sure Hypothesis has an automated scoring, but I didn't use that much anyways. And so I had looked at them both. They're basically the two sort of the big ones right now that are the most advanced. There's a bunch of little smaller ones, and there's older ones that aren't so nice. But Hypothesis and Perusall, like you had Hypothesis with your school, our school just happened to have Perusall. And so, yeah, they both are very, very similar in their usage. So I have Hypothesis, but then Hypothesis is going to start charging me. And so I said, oh, I'll take Perusall. As far as, I think you mentioned the week-to-week, how to use it. This was just for their larger assignment. So for the research, I had them do 2 papers. So they have 2 assignment at the beginning of the semester, review paper at the end of the semester. And so those are the 2 sort of major usages they have for Perusall. I could be used for day-to-day usage. I simply haven't done that yet. And they're awful comfortable using discussion boards on D2L for some of the smaller assignments. And so if it were me probably using it for other things, it would only be for a little bit larger assignments, because there is a couple extra steps where they have to go outside of it. And you mentioned in Hypothesis had upload YouTube, upload websites. You can do the same thing as well, Perusall. And one thing I noticed when I was doing some of my background research on this is one of the things that one paper did, can't remember the name off the top of my head, they actually had students make videos of themselves in a teaching context. Like they would do a sample teaching assignment that they would then upload into Perusall. And then from there they can have, thank you, then they could go from and make comments on the actual YouTube video. So wherever there was a moment where they wanted to comment, let's say at 17-minute mark or whatever, they would make a comment on their student teaching presentation. Oh, this is a great teaching point. Oh, this is a poor teaching point. And again, the uploading of websites, I never did that just because it wasn't really what my assignment was going to be about, but it does that as well. So there's a lot of things like the websites and the YouTube that I didn't use, but depending on what kind of class you're teaching, it might be a great thing for you to use. So I do have teaching presentations in my class, and so it's something I considered doing this semester, but I just opted out on it because I kind of wanted to perfect how they use it as a reading tool. Anyone else? I think we got about a minute left. Oh, thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Philip. Thank you, everyone, for showing up. Wova is an interesting app I have on my phone. I have about 1 million alerts from Wova. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.